Thank you all for coming. This is our public meeting number 2 for the Westport Hazard Mitigation Plan. Please make sure you sign the sheet. And there was a lot of you here, so you're going to have to wait for it. Just to introduce us briefly, this is Annalise Orland, who is the primary writer of the plan. James Lacrosse, he's our planner. And I'm Rob Damaris. We're all from PAR Corporation. Our plan tonight is to briefly discuss the hazard mitigation plan, what it is, how it goes. Most of you here pretty much understand that, I think. And then go over the mitigation measures that we're looking for input on the prioritization of those steps, and then we'll go over the next steps for the next steps to get it adopted. So we're just about wrapping this program up. And again, thank you for coming. So.
Thank you, Rob. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Again, my name is James Lacrosse. I'm one of the planners at PAR here, PAR Corp. And what I'm just going to go over with everyone tonight in the room is the hazard mitigation plan regarding and specifics to the plan purpose. The natural hazard preparedness that we look to do from a planning standpoint is where we really try to take the hazard mitigation that's been identified to look to reduce the loss of life and property by lessening the the impact of disasters. Having a hazard mitigation plan will increases awareness of hazard, risks, and vulnerabilities, identifies action for risk reduction, and focuses local resources on the greater risks while communicating priorities to state and federal officials. Some of the plan benefits from implementing this update for the town is protecting public safety and preventing loss of life and injury, obviously one of the most important, reducing damage to existing and future development, preventing damage to communities' unique economic, cultural, and environmental assets, maintaining community connections that are essential for recovery, and helping accomplish other community objectives such as capital improvements, natural resources, and economic resiliency. As we go through the hazard mitigation planning process, we'll have 4 main areas that we've talked to you about, we've discussed, and we've gone through. We begin with the planning process and the resources, really where you assemble everything that's going to be needed to put the plan together, or to update the plan in this case. It includes reaching out to the technical experts, defining the planning areas, identifying all those individuals, agencies, departments, neighboring jurisdictions, abutters, business partners, nonprofits, for-profits, everyone that's going to be involved. From there, you'll start to look to assess the risks with that team, whether it's one big group or individual groups that have been identified. In this particular phase of the 4 phases, this is where the characteristics and potential consequences of hazards get brought to light. This would include creating an understanding of where the hazards may occur and what people, property, or community assets may be in harm's way. So it really gives kind of it lays out a landscape of what is kind of in the way for all those hazards that have been identified. And from there, you'll then get to the third, which is one of the more important steps, is the developing all the mitigation strategies to tackle all those things that have been identified. So in order to do that, you'll set priorities and develop long-term strategies for avoiding or minimizing the undersized effects of the disasters. Communities base their strategies on assessments of all their unique regulatory, administrative, and financial capabilities that can support mitigation. So as we all know, there's so many variables that come into play when you want to, for example, maybe reconstruct your fire station or your police station consolidate, but then it's in a flood zone. So, there's all these different things you have to take into place. So as this report's getting updated, we try to pull all that stuff together and really come up with kind of a plan on how to attack that so that we don't run into those hiccups down the road. And then finally, we look to adopt and implement the plan. And this is where you bring everything to life. We bring it to the table for everyone to see. The document gets put before everyone, whether it's your city council or your select board. It gets adopted. From there, we put it before the state agency. So in this case, it would be MEMA. And then from there, it goes to FEMA. And once FEMA adopts it, then we go back into that 5-year plan, bring it back to you guys, and that's it. So That's my piece, so I'm going to turn it over to Annalise now and let her finish.
So the purpose of tonight is that we're going to be going over the proposed mitigation measures. And here are some of the sources that we used to create the draft list of the proposed mitigation measures that you see here on this table. Hello, how are you? So some of the sources include the 2018 Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Plan, the Summary of Findings Report. It also includes some of the findings within the East Beach Corridor Vulnerability Study in 2021. And also the survey results that were collected during public meeting number 1 back in October. And then finally, using all the information collected and then put on the hazard area of concern map, which you can see also over here, to help create the draft list of the proposed mitigation measures. So tonight we'll be identifying any proposed mitigation measures we think is missing from this list, and then how they reflect natural hazard types such as dam failures, droughts, earthquakes, hurricanes, flood, extreme weather, all those different types of events. And some of the questions that we're going to be asking ourselves tonight to help refine this list and get it in its final form includes whose assistance do we need to implement the proposed mitigation measure? What steps do we need to take before actions can be completed? When do we want to complete a mitigation measure by? Where can a mitigation measure be implemented within the community to protect from natural hazards? Why is this proposed mitigation measure important, or who or what does it protect? And then what mitigation measures should be started now for future concerns? So those are going to be some of the questions that we ask ourselves tonight. So PAR's here to help facilitate this meeting with the community for community input. So we're going to start with the draft list that you see here that were sourced from the information I mentioned earlier. So then once we make sure that all of the base ideas are down, we will then rank the proposed mitigation measures by priority. Just a quick disclaimer too, the priority is just based on this moment in time. The hazard mitigation plan is a dynamic document where as it's being executed by the town, priorities may shift, and that's okay. And the hazard mitigation planning committee can make adjustments as they see fit. But we will rank them tonight based on a high, medium, and low priority. And then we'll also discuss 2 timelines for each of these proposed mitigation measures, which ones are long-term, which is 3 to 5 years, versus which ones are short-term, 1 to 3 years, and then which ones are ongoing efforts currently as well. And then just a quick schedule update as well for the hazard mitigation plan report. So we will take the feedback from tonight for the proposed measures and then implement that into the draft report. We'll also finalize elements such as implementation responsibilities, the estimated costs, and then also the potential funding sources as well, just to act as a better guide as it gets developed by the town. And then the draft report will go to the hazard mitigation planning committee for review. Then once all those review comments are addressed, it'll go out to the public for review for community feedback. And then finally, once all that feedback is integrated, there will be a final report that then will be adopted by the town of Westport and then go to NEMA and FEMA for review. So those are the next steps. So that was just our quick presentation, because really what we're here to do tonight is to go through this draft list and make sure that there are no major things missing or any major action items or mitigation measures missing. And then we'll go through and prioritize the list as well and talk about those time frame pieces. So unless there are any questions, I think we can get started with some discussions. We'll definitely bring everything closer to the group since we will have an intimate discussion, which will be good, and talk about some of those next steps for what the town of Westport would like to see. So,
Are those going to be on the slide, or do we need binoculars?
so I'm gonna bring everything closer, but also there are printouts on this table here that we can pass out, which everyone can have their own copy, they can annotate, and we can make sure to collect those afterwards as well. So we can pass those around now. And then let me pass around pens as well.
Ready to get one? Yeah.
And Does anyone need a pen? Oh. Oh, we got one, perfect. And then, so unless there are any questions, why don't we start by bringing everything closer? And then, I think let's just bring the map right over here, since everyone will be able to see. And then we can just start facilitating those conversations, to kind of workshop the different aspects of the proposed measures, so. Yeah, I think, is that better
Is that better?
for everyone?
Let me hear it.
I can move out of the way.
I think
would
we all
put it
do
right
it
here.
so.
Is that a, oh, okay.
They're both on the, only one is supposed to be on the table. One is supposed to be for you, speaking, whoever's
Okay.
speaking.
Oh, okay.
So I will put that on.
Give me that mic.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Just a little advice from somebody who's seen a lot of these. Try to make it as local as possible. Park Corp can write a HMV that will get accepted by FEMA, but that doesn't necessarily help the town as much as something that's very local and thought out for your priorities for your community. And also, when you're looking at these, I've seen a lot of these which, 10 years, you're not able to accomplish what you are really trying to look for. So if you try and think about things that are actually actionable and can be done without, necessarily pie in the sky, limited staff, limited funding, things like that, try and give yourself some wins as well.
Definitely. I think a good indicator, if it's too broad of an idea or might take too long, is that when we talk about time frame for some of these, and if we say, well, that's not possible to accomplish between 3 to 5 years, then we know that we can take this draft item and then scale it down. So what would be possible within 3 to 5 years, or what would be possible in the next 1 to 3 years? That'll help us kind of be in the right mind frame when having those discussions as well, so. Perfect, so let me get my notepad and then we can get started.
Excuse me, do we need this?
No.
So no more trips. Thank you.
Here, so I guess what we'll start with is, everyone has a copy in front of them too. So I would say we can either read them out loud if we think that'd be more productive with the small group, or we can each individually go through and read them on our own. I have some discussion questions as well. So maybe we'll take 5 minutes for everyone to just read it for the first time or refresh their memory about the proposed mitigation list and annotate it as you see fit. And then we can go into what we think might be missing for trends. And we'll start there to make sure that everything that the town of Westport wants is covered in the list. And then we can get into the prioritizing the list, so. I do actually, thank you. Yeah, you can bring these over. And then after everyone gets a chance to read through, and then we brainstorm, we'll go ahead and start to rank them. And then did everyone get a chance to sign it?
Yeah.
Okay. So then, I think that should be enough time, unless anyone wants additional time. No? Okay. And I know some of us obviously are very familiar with the list as well, so I guess some of my takeaways when reviewing the first list was there's a few trends and topics that you can see throughout the list, which included the East Beach flood protection. And then another trend I saw throughout the list was electric services. A lot of discussions about protecting utility services and specifically electric utility poles. There's also a trend throughout the draft list related to communication and discussions related to the emergency management planning in the town of Westport, which I know is an ongoing effort right now through the draft process with the fire department. There are also trends related to flooding at the head of Westport that's seen throughout the proposed list right now. Another trend was mitigation measures related to the highway department needing additional support. There were some items regarding localized flooding in specific areas, and then also a lot of trends related to extreme heat concerns. But I don't know if anyone else noticed any other trends when they're reading through that I may not have covered, or if there's anything that you think is apparent concern or vulnerability in the town of Westport that wasn't covered with the list shown here. So are there any thoughts related to that?
There's one thing I've noticed in this list is that the Point Historic District isn't referenced. It's a neighborhood that's on the National Register of Historic Places. It's all the way at the south end of Main Road. If you look at the map over here, there's some of those blue areas right at the tip of Westport before you get to Horseneck Beach. It's a really vulnerable spot, but there are historical and cultural resources there that are at risk to sea level rise. Some of them are in the flood zone. So it's
So I believe we picked that up in the risk assessment.
okay.
Is there a mitigation measure we should add or can add?
I don't know what the mitigation measure would be.
So that would be coastal, right?
Right.
We've had the piers there underwater. We've had the parking lot down there underwater. So we don't have to wait 25 years to have that infrastructure where the Westport fishing fleet, as it is, really doesn't have infrastructure if your piers are underwater. And the parking area where you park your truck to unload lobster pots is underwater, you know, it's a problem right now. So I think Michael's got, you know, that is both a vulnerable and a historically significant and an economically significant part of Westport.
So
There's been discussion about, well, I don't know, there's been talk about raising some of the piers down there.
So this is
How much
a
that would
really
cost?
high-level plan, so
Okay.
we'll just put mitigation measures
Okay.
for the Point Historic District. And, you know, obviously it's gonna be more than $100,000. So our break point is like $100,000, just greater than or less than.
Okay.
And it'll probably be long-term, and then, so to facilitate the discussion, like, would you consider that a high priority, medium, or low? And that's what we're looking for from input from the community. And given the attendance here, I would say it's high, right? Because I saw a lot of head shaking when you brought it up, so, well, I saw 3 to 4 head shakes, so.
I'm John Bullard from the planning board, and I chair the climate resilience committee, which all these people are on. You could, and I just briefly looked at the whole list, say that half or 2/3 of these items are in the area of planning, communication, outreach, which is all necessary, admirable, and for the most part, lower dollar amounts compared to things like elevating piers and other work. The other 1/3 is things where you do something. And I guess I want to talk a little bit about the things where you do something. But the other point I want to make with 4 people and 5 people in attendance is that I think the doing of some things helps in the communication and outreach. When people see things happening, they start paying attention. When I was, I don't know, in the 1970s, leading the revitalization of the waterfront historic district, we had to redo all the streets, and there was a lot of bedrock. Dynamite got people's attention. And, it's funny, but when you use dynamite, people start to realize, oh, something's happening here. There's a climate of change. The road I used to drive to work I can't drive to work anymore because they're covering it with paving blocks. So my point is that if there's 2 reasons to elevate the priority of projects where you do something. One is that one, it gets people's attention and facilitates all of the planning and outreach because people actually see stuff happening. The other is that there may be continuing sources of revenue where getting an early start on something is the only way to digest the elephant. It's too big to do all at once. And so we need to start biting off pieces of this elephant into digestible pieces. Not that I advocate eating elephants. And so there are a couple of things like that. Maybe I read this too quickly. We have something in coastal flooding about maximizing the usable life of the barrier beaches, but I didn't see anything about elevating evacuation roadways. Now, maybe it's just because I looked at it too quickly and I didn't see it and it's there, but every town in Massachusetts, every city and town gets Chapter 90 funds to do highway work. It happens every single year. And so there's planning that takes place because we know we're getting this, we hope, every year. What are we going to do this year? What are we going to do next year? What are we going to do the year after? Because it's a continuing source of revenue. And there are all kinds of things that go into prioritization of that. But I think if we identified roadways, I am biased, I live right off of Cherry and Webb Lane, which already floods. It's not in any of the study areas for the MVP. They're doing East Beach, they're doing the Nubble, but Cherry and Webb is you know, which is the road to Tripp's Boatyard, is left out. If you said in terms of things to do, that we know River Road, East Beach Road, Cherry and Webb Road, there are a bunch of roads that flood right now that people need to escape. So that doesn't take a lot of outreach, that doesn't take a lot of communication, that just takes a lot of money to do. But if you put it in a plan and give it a high priority, then people can say, well, that's not the only priority in town, but when we're doing a road like that with a repeatable source of revenue that we get every year, we should think about when we do those roads, elevating. So that's a kind of simple thing that gets people's attention. Oh, why are they elevating River Road? You know, why is it higher now? It's necessary, it's gonna have to be done sooner or later. There's two other items I would put in that category. One, there was a proposal in the East Beach Study Committee, I think that's where it was, to do a managed retreat program where the Buzzards Bay Coalition was gonna raise money to acquire any parcels on East Beach Road that people voluntarily wanted to sell and then turn them over to the town. The coalition wouldn't hold on to them, but it would be the vehicle to acquire. And the leaders of East Beach said, nobody in our neighborhood wants to sell. Absolutely nobody wants to sell. There have been for sale signs on East Beach, you know, since that meeting. And they could be acquired right now for reasonable amounts of money. As I say, it's a voluntary program, and it is something, I think, in the state plan about managed retreat. And that is the big ticket item of all big ticket items. I mean, I don't know that there is a bigger ticket item than moving people, including me, off of the barrier beach. But that's why I'm saying, we know it needs to happen. If it's voluntary, and you identify it right now, and the state is saying, we're serious about this stuff, which I hope translates into we're gonna put money into this, then you can begin the process. You know, there's one or two for sale signs right now on East Beach. Those should be acquired right now. We shouldn't be waiting till we do community outreach and everything else. We should just be acquiring them, turning them over to the, and then those are two lots that don't have to be acquired 10 years from now. So that's the second one, and the third one comes under the heat, extreme temperatures, and you've got this identified with, I can't find it right now, but it's, you know, acquire room air conditioners for people. I mean, to think that people are gonna go to the high school or the Council on Aging is not realistic. They're not gonna wanna spend the night there. And so what we need, especially in the north end of town, is a program for income eligible people to help them get a one-room air conditioner and maybe the subsidy to run it. And again, that's a huge ticket item if you try and do it all in 1 year. If you wait till, you know, we have a month, this is the coldest June we've had forever. If you wait till a month of 90-degree temperatures and say, now we need to buy 7,000 units, that's a lot of money. But if you said, we want to do this over the next 25 years, you know, we want to make some available every year for 25 years, then you're making it a digestible size problem, and you're again doing something. You're making the community and people more resilient, And by doing something, you were facilitating the whole education, outreach, planning thing. Because we know we need to do something. It doesn't take more planning to know you need to do something. Things like I've just said. Sorry to take so long.
No, that's good, those are good points, yeah.
Those are really good points. And then, I think there are a few items that resonated. One thing I did want to mention too is, I believe the managed retreat is on page,
Yeah, it's on page 56. It's the second one. So I'm saying, besides developing the plan, what I'm saying is do it, you know?
start acquisition.
Yeah. Create a way right now to do it. And we had a year ago, or whenever it was, Michael, the Buzzards Bay Coalition saying, we'd love to facilitate the process of that. And they're experts. I mean, I've looked at organizations around the country. I don't know anyone that does that kind of stuff better than the Buzzards Bay Coalition. So they're a tremendous resource that's interested in this.
And then what do you think are some complications that have like hindered that from starting?
Well, what hindered it is the state said, we want to do planning, we don't want to do it, we actually don't want to accomplish anything, we just like to plan. That's unfair, I know, I shouldn't say that, Michael, but that's the way I read it.
So some of the steps related to that, or like quote unquote the red tape maybe, has like prevented some of those actions from happening?
I mean, as I read the summary of the new state plan, it includes, you know, it elevates the issue of managed retreat, which is not something the entire Commonwealth has to deal with, but certainly coastal Massachusetts has to deal with.
And the East Beach situation is a rather unique situation, somewhat, I'm not sure I understand the history exactly correctly, but that this all, the reason that there are seasonal trailers there was that there was enough of an outcry about what East Beach had been, which I think is what was still alive in people's minds after 1954. But prior to 38, I think you've seen the pictures. You know, there were hotels and everything else,
Hotels, houses,
beach and
yeah.
houses.
Pavilions.
This was all developed for, this was a place to go. So that was still within a lot of people's memory. People owned properties there and all that kind of stuff. Now, the state took all of Horse Neck, but left our town beach. They took Gooseberry Island. They took, and I think it was just as likely that they would have taken East Beach as well. It was all one thing, but this sort of local outcry came, and then the idea, well, we can't put houses back on it because it's such a high-risk area, so they did this leasing thing. So it's a very unique situation. But it is something, as John said, that we could, it's possible to eat that, you know, that whatever people's seasonal rental rates are. If you think of what is the fair market value of a right to, you know, rent something seasonally, you know, so the farther east you get in those lots, the narrower they are. That is the
Less space between the road and the ocean.
right between. And the actual paved surface that was the traveled way is pushed all the way to the landward side, there is no landward side, but to the non-ocean side of the right-of-way. So you have a right-of-way that's 40 feet wide, and you have a traveled way that's 20 feet wide. It's sitting away from the ocean. Well, all the trailers use that piece of public way to different extents. The most minimal of that is people park there. Other people have their trailers sitting in the right-of-way. At the east end, the beach is so shrunk now that the reason those lots are for sale is you almost can't fit anything on them any longer. So, you know, if there were a program, I guess I did have a question about the process of, are the blank boxes, we're not gonna fill out all the blank boxes of every one of these squares, are we?
No, our staff's gonna take care of the print boxes, yep. So
Okay.
anything related to implementation responsibilities, timeframe, estimate costs, and potential funding sources, we'll be able to fill out, but we'll be having conversations about
Yeah.
timeframe throughout this meeting
So
tonight.
the idea of, I think what's really important is the first of the empty boxes, which is the responsible parties.
Mhm.
Like, you know, okay, and if we develop a plan and implement a plan for managed retreat, who in the town's going to do that? Is that the Board of Selectmen responsibility? Who begins buying these lots? Who goes to the town meeting every year and has an article that says, we're gonna raise and appropriate $100,000 in a land acquisition fund, and we'll acquire, you know, that kind of, you know, sounds like, you know, Board of Selectmen kind of activity.
Mhm.
And the idea, then, and with that really comes a campaign to raise the money to do those things.
Mhm.
And it's the same with, but that idea of managed retreat, having that fund, you know, there are some of these lots are on the market for less than $100,000.
Mhm.
So, you know, so you could,
About how many lots are there? Like 10 or
I
100?
think there were
50?
There are about 50 lots, and there are two, I don't know if they're both the easternmost, but I think they are the easternmost lots are good for sale signs. And it's just a matter of time, and we've just been extraordinarily fortunate. We've been just out of the, you know, at least North American weather patterns. You know, we've had a period where we haven't had hurricanes very infrequently, and they were just barely hurricanes when they hit us. So we had Bob, you know, but
That was 91.
if you look at 38, 44,
Right.
54.
What are the category
In the
threes?
early 60s, you know, we had hurricanes, you know, certainly every 10 years.
Mhm.
And a couple of good ones, I mean, bad ones. So, you know, that kind of stuff changes attitudes.
Mhm.
And we have, depending on the pattern of the nor'easters, if they take their typical pattern and go way out around Nantucket, and the wind is really northeast, you know, blowing easterly or east-northeast, which is the worst condition. The stuff that's worse for Boston is not bad for us, because that's on the land for us. So those nor'easters that pass like they do typically, that pound Boston, yeah, we see some impact just because there's a big wind, but they're not driving the waves ashore. If they stall south of us, or if they take a more westerly pattern and not go way offshore, then we see the wind is counterclockwise. So we see the wind is coming southeasterly or east-southeasterly, and that's all onshore for us. And that's what we had two winters ago, and we had a succession of those, and all the photographs you see just pounded East Beach. So there's no, you know, there's no cure for that. We're not, you know, all we can do is I think, we get good early warning, you know, evacuation routes, all of those kinds of things, and then sometime we're in a pattern of storms where we get that would occur once every 10 years or so. Then I think the dynamics of saying, yeah, we gotta put 100,000 in. And it's just like in 1954, it said 38 washed out all these houses, killed all these people. And then in 54, washed out all, you know, everyone who rebuilt, washed those all away, and then killed some more people. And said, you know, the state said, well, we're not going to let you do that anymore. And so they acquired all this high-risk area. So I think we now have to think about evacuation, managed retreat. Let's, for whatever rights people have in those area beaches, we compensate them for, but at some point they have to go. East Beach is sooner than later, but you know, it's probably all going to happen at some point.
When you talk about evacuations, it makes me think about communications and what the town's communication needs are. And I think that's an area that's really cross-cutting from a hazard mitigation perspective, but also just from a good governance perspective too, to let people know what's going on in their neighborhoods, if the town's bringing in a water line, or if we're doing construction on one of the roadways, or that you don't want to go down River Road in a high rain and storm surge scenario. So I think that's a place where the town could, it's not a super heavy lift to improve our communications. And it's at a cost that is not insurmountable for us. I think we just need to be able to find the resources in order to improve those communications.
You know, in a good example, if you look at Bristol, Rhode Island. So if you just go along on the coast, they have signs that say that it's a flood hazard area. They have a sign that's up in the air and it shows a little wave and says flood hazard area. Don't drive into the flooded roadways. So that's, you know,
You don't
I don't know what that is, $250, something, so, it's not, that's the kind of thing that we could mark River Road, Atlantic Avenue, we could say, this is a flood hazard area. And then also the evacuation routes, that's something that in a meeting, people will agree. If they're just fleeing the town to higher elevations, in a single meeting, and I think people have already talked about this, we know how to get out of town. We know, how do you get on 88, how do you get out? If you're down in a Coxet, because they have to be careful, probably the best route is to get up into Little Compton and out through Tiverton. But, you know, and mark those. So there's a piece of, you know, physical communication, people can see it's a risk area and you can have evacuation routes. And then, you know, luckily we don't have to use them, you know, but at least you can do that. And then, and the other thing is, how do we, you know, the more complicated thing is the bigger communication points that, you know, how do we notify people, how do they, and then if we tell them to flee, where do we tell them to flee to? Do we tell them to go to the high school, and do we open up the high school? Is there a process for doing that? Do we, you know, someplace where there's, I was gonna say, someplace where there's water,
Yeah.
you know, that risk, you know, how do people stay, even if they shelter and if their houses are not damaged by the hurricane, but they lose power, what do we do? Which I think is a big risk for a town with no public utilities.
So one of the things when I see this is, you know, just in terms of how you think about it, extreme temperatures, you have 10 things here, but really you have one thing, is
Right.
to help people get cool during deadly, you know, heat events.
Right.
And everything else is sort of a subcategory
That's right.
within that, you know, and so then you think, okay, we have limited resources. You know, how do we prioritize this? Because your prioritization will help you with grants and funding, as well as when you talk to, you know, when you go to town meeting where all ideas, you know, eventually end up. And, you know, how do you prioritize that list of subcategories within the idea, you know, in a deadly heat event, we need to get people cooler. And then, you know, you think about resilience as well, and we talked about the fact that you don't have public utilities, you know, you're in a coastal environment which is subject to electricity loss. Well, and I love the idea of buying air conditioners for low-income homes, but what happens if you're also, you know, your hazard consists of two different things, you know, those low, you know,
Right.
is that the best allocation of your resources when you may have, you know, you may have to think about the resiliency of a power outage as well. And so maybe, you know, maybe when you think about your prioritization is, first, do we have a place that has a generator, water, heat, you know, that can function? And that's, you know, and then you can sort of go down the list of, you know, these are great ideas. Same with road elevation. Road elevation is extremely complicated, takes a long time, takes a lot of funds. But is there a way to increase your evacuation notice so that you can, those people that are in those, you know, have those hazardous roads can get notified an hour or 2 hours earlier than they currently are? You know, is that outreach the prioritization so that people aren't backed up on River Road during a storm event? That's, you know, that's how I try and think of these, like, think about, you know, what's the priority here of extreme temperature? Well, obviously, getting people cool. You know, and then you say, all right, well, it stinks to send a night in a high school, but it's better than dying. So as you go down, you know, so you're prioritizing those efforts, and you have limited staff and limited resources. So I think you know, this is what I talked about, trying to get achievable. You know, what would be the first thing that we just have to do, and then the next thing, and as you move down those, you know, there's some brilliant goals in here, but you know, you have to tie them to your allocation, your resources, and your timeline.
I think that I totally agree with you. I think that what's likely to be developed is, you know, multifaceted, to say the least, so that it's not a question of either or. If you developed a program with the Council on Aging or some other nonprofit to acquire room air conditioners and maybe a solar system that would power them, or, you know, you figure out the point you're making, what happens if electricity's interrupted, what happens if they can't afford to pay for the electricity. You gotta deal with that too. But it doesn't come at the expense of anything, because if you set up the program, then, you know, Westport's an interesting town in that when you go to town meeting, I think our town logo is, we're proud of being cheap, you know, we just don't want to spend money on anything. And yet we have.
Not the only town, by the way.
What?
Not the only town.
I know, but you still have some incredibly devoted, significant family foundations in Westport, or companies, Bay Coast and others, where even if town meeting doesn't want to do something, you had a program to fund air conditioners. I'm just using that as an example. I could see every year, you know, a Bay Coast or, you know, Manton or Rathman or, you know, some of the family foundations around here saying, yeah, I'll stick some money into that.
Yeah.
And, but the point, I think, of something like that is that you want to do a little bit every year so that it doesn't get to be a huge problem that you can't afford. And I think the evacuation route signs that Bob talked about is another example of, if you do something, it has an education. What the hell are you guys putting up evacuation signs for? Because you're going to have to evacuate. That's why we're putting the signs up. What, I am? You know, just the putting up of the signs. We have so many damn signs on Route 88. I mean, it's like the state wants to get rid of signs, so they put them all on 88. And it makes it ugly as all get out. So I know the state can come up with signs. That's what they specialize in. And so what's the evacuation route? Because that does something in terms of education. It doesn't do something if your road is flooded. That's why I'm saying that elevating roads, yeah, it's expensive, but it at least allows you to evacuate if you need to evacuate.
And that's an issue that's very near and dear to my heart in terms of talking to all the communities within the South Coast, is this idea of this outreach, you know, the signage idea, I absolutely love. And even, I love it even more if you think about it from a regional standpoint. Dartmouth is having the same issue.
Yep.
Fall River,
Yep.
Fairhaven, you know, all these other communities are having the same issue of, you know, and also your roads don't stop at Dartmouth. You know,
Right.
so like,
Right.
you know, well,
Where am I going?
it's great if Westport does it, but if you go through Dartmouth or you go through another town, so when you do things at a regional level, it's easier to get state funding typically, because the state knows that a lot of organizations are prioritizing this. And B, you know, you have that, the evacuation continues over the line into, you know, the next town over. I've been talking to towns, and I can tell you, Swansea, talked to Fairhaven, you know, and that signage issue. And also the signage issue of just people knowing what a flood zone is. So one of the things I tried to do unsuccessfully thus far is having signage, you know, at the beach or at public locations, just a sign that says, floodwaters will be this high. You know, so when you see that,
Yeah.
you know, it's
Yeah.
like, oh, wow, that's over my head. Like, that gives you the idea that, you know, or, you know, I've seen a few signs that, oh, you know, in Hurricane 38 got here, but that's not at the beaches, that's not at the, you know, the places that people really go. It's the same with this public outreach. You know, if we had gone to the corner store and put up these signs and talked to everybody who came through and said, you know, hey, you know, are you interested in this? We had a guy come in and talk about trees, you know, but he didn't stay for the meeting. You know, it's the same thing. If you can get it to the people, to the places people congregate and have that signage that says, you know, the flood is this high. Have you ever thought about that before? And then have a QR code that can provide you more information. maybe Westport does an evacuation route and you could have that in that. So, if you talk to Serped or some regional organizations, maybe that's something that we could, I've certainly been pushing it, and it's a thing to, when you can think regionally, that is helpful for funding and for other areas as well.
So that would be a good grant application.
Yep. It would be something that I've been thinking about quite a bit, so I don't control all the grants.
When you look at the tree issue, NSTAR has been doing a lot in terms of trimming trees. And so that is something that reduces the loss of electricity and doesn't come out of the town budget. It doesn't come out of the state budget. It comes out of NSTAR's budget, and they've been doing it. And so including things like that, keep trimming the trees that are near electric lines, is a really good idea as a high priority because the funding source isn't competing with anything else. So, again, what you've shown with this is there's 100 things we gotta do, right? So it's not one, it's 100. But if you can do something like tree trimming where it's not the town doing it, it's the state doing it, but it's NSTAR, and you talk to NSTAR and say, you're in the plan, by the way, for cutting down branches that every time my electricity goes out, they say, oh, it's a tree that fell on an electric line on Reed Road, and I go down and drive on Reed Road, and I say, wait a minute, the electric lines are taller than the trees. Are these branches falling upwards? Is that what's going on here? But they're still doing a good job at seeing in advance what tree limbs need to come down.
I think in this list too, when I was talking about trends as well, there are some things that are repetitive or go along the same vein, so we might be able to consolidate this
Yeah.
list too, so then the things that are high priority in short term can get focused on more. Do you think that would be more successful for the town of Westport by reducing this draft list to?
I think a lot of the planning and outreach are very, very similar, and if you looked at, can we consolidate that? It would give each one of the things you consolidate a lot more impact.
So I think, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like pretty much most of what we want on this list is covered. But I think we could maybe consolidate the list to make it more impactful, and then also go through and then maybe change some language to make it more impactful for what the action item will be. So I think maybe what we can do is, how about everyone on their individual sheet right now, cross out 3 items that you think is redundant, let's say, and could be consolidated into another item. And then we can think about how to rephrase that item. And then after that, we can start to prioritize the list based on that, unless there's any other final thoughts anyone had regarding the brainstorming and the list as it stands right now. But I think that would be a good exercise to start with.
And we can incorporate Mr. Haynes' comment about grouping all the heat things together and then like priority number 1, priority number 2, so.
Yeah, it does help when I get a grant, when I get a request for a grant, seeing a sort of a shotgun approach and, oh, it was on this list. Well, it was on the list, but there's also 33 other things on this list. But where I see that was the town's priority number 1 or priority number 2 action item. I think prior in it, and having worked in municipalities as well, having that priorities for staff, where they can actually say, okay, we can't accomplish all these, but this was the town's priority. It is helpful. It's very hard to do though. So, I don't want to say that it's simple. It's just, for certain reasons, prioritization is important.
I gotta run, but I'm gonna leave you my highest priorities here.
Thank
you.
In my name.
Thank you.
I don't mean you can cross out all the rest, but you'll at least get the reverse of what you asked for.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Some of
Thank you.
these, I'm a little confused about, just the temperature sensor installation.
So, so I'm the person who wrote up these
Yes.
based on the, working through the CRC. I think the idea was to try and identify areas of the community which are most likely to get high heat impacts. Because anybody who has driven, you know, from, even, you know, from Old Colony, you know, even from the, you know, where the watershed alliance is,
Yep.
down to our house, it's like be 10 degrees difference.
Yeah, in the summer, if you watch your car temperature thermometer,
Yeah.
when you.
Get on 88, you'll watch it drop 10 degrees.
There's no question that the temperature when you pass Route 6 on 88 is 10 degrees warmer than when I get off at 88 at River Road.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that that's,
And, no, go ahead.
The heat is clustered in the north end of town, and we're sitting in the southwesterly breeze
Yeah.
off the ocean.
so I think that that's interesting. And that's one of the things where you really want to make sure that you have that local sense, because when I see temperature sensor installation, I say, all right, everybody knows when it's real hot, and we also have the weather channel. So, but what you're saying is, you're trying to identify like individual heat zones within the town, so that, you know,
Right.
during a heat event, you know, maybe the town prioritizes.
Well, if you, right, I mean, when I thought about this, and some of this, you know, relates to that is, like, what's the scope of the problem, meaning how many, and I think it relates to, like I said, create and distribute a community survey of, you know, like, just how many homes are we gonna target in what areas? And, so that's what it went to. I mean, and I don't think this is, maybe it just didn't fit in a box here, but the health department just got a grant and distributed air quality sensors around the town, which people could log into online now and find out what the air quality is in their neighborhood. So if you had asthma, you might, other things you might decide, I'm not gonna go out today because the air quality is really poor and, you know, it's extremely localized. But anyway, that was the, I mean, I think a bunch of these things relates to defining the scope of the problem and where you want to focus your resources.
And determining sort of the most vulnerable portions of
Right.
the, you know, so
Right.
are there portions that have, you know, more senior citizens? Are there
Exactly.
portions that, you know, it tends to be hotter in this
Right.
region, so maybe as staff, you start,
Right.
you know, your protocol,
Right.
you know, on the north end.
Right, exactly. And I mean, and I think like when one of the biggest challenges, because I talked to Beverly Bish, who's the head of the Council on Aging, and she has actually been giving some of these grants out. I'm not exactly sure what the source of the money is, you know, where she gets that from. But, you know, if I imagine if I went to her and said, okay, Beverly, now we want you to administer this program, you know, she would say, like, if you went to the health department right now, we would say, we don't have anybody who can do this, run a grant program. And I think you might hear it from the, you know, the treasurer's department, you know, we can't handle any more grant programs, because we've heard that for grants that we give out. So, but anyway, that's what it related to. And I agreed, you know, with what you were saying, which is that that we still contemporaneously need to develop, you know, heat refuges, you know, beyond the Council on Aging, because, you know, people may not want to go there, but if it gets hot enough, they will go there, at least for the hottest part of the day. And not necessarily sleeping there, but,
Yeah, there's not a bad idea on this list.
yeah,
I think that's the way to think, you know, there's not a bad idea on this list, it's just.
right. But I don't know who just knowing the personnel situation, for example, if in the health department, there's not enough resources to ask someone to take this on as an you know, like, pull this plan together, start writing, you know, looking for grants, figuring out who's going to administer this, you know, conduct these kind of studies. They're, you know, people they're over their head right now, just in doing, you know, what they're doing now. And so that's a challenge. But when you were talking earlier about the role of the select board in something like this, or the role of the town administrator in trying to make it a priority for them to take this up, like, yeah, this is putting together the information to make it a priority, so someone can come back to the Board of Health and say, okay, we want you to make this a priority, or whoever it would be. But I still think you could compress this in better, in more effective language about it, to narrow it down. And I can try and do that, at least this part of it.
Yeah, I think we can consolidate some of these, and
Yeah.
I want to echo what you said about the staff side of things. You know, are there areas where some of these mitigation measures can be bundled together with other mitigation measures, so that way it could all be part of one particular grant application as opposed to being different pieces, because the administrative burden can become quite a lot, I think, as you know, from the Board of Health.
Right,
And
yeah,
we do
yeah.
the same thing, and it can take up a lot of time, where, you know, there are times when I'm pretty much, I just do grant administration 40 hours a week and go to meetings and whatever, and I'm not actually actively working on any particular deliverable. So it can be, if there are ways that we can combine some of these together, I think that, you know, to maximize the effectiveness of the grant application, that would be ideal.
Yeah.
This list can, I just sort of looked at, you know, what I thought the important things here. But this can certainly be together. This list sort of came out of conversations that broke out into each one of these topics, and you diligently copied the conversation. But I think, you know, sort of on the managed retreat, the idea of the heat risk in the future of climate change is an important issue here, because it tends to fall in the north end of town, away from the water, and that tends to be the poorest out of town. And it's the town, it's the part of the town that developed along the Route 6 streetcar. So this was housing for jobs in the mills in Fall River. Those jobs are gone, the housing remains, and people are in older homes. They tend not to have emergency generators. They're on small, non-conforming lots. many of them oddly shaped, because, I live right next to Aunt Mary, and, why we don't each need a cesspool, I'll just use Aunt Mary said, we have lots of that. Now we got zoning and a lot of times, and, Aunt Mary doesn't live next door any longer, and so we have lots of people who whose lots are in some cases 38 feet wide, and you're supposed to have 100 feet for the neighbor's septic system. Yes, we have dozens and dozens, I was going to say hundreds, maybe hundreds, but we got dozens and dozens of lots like that.
So one of the things that, when I'm hearing,
People are aging in those lots. So people have older homes, they bought them 50 years ago. I don't know if they're all paid for, or they're primarily paid for, and people are living on fixed incomes, and that house is really their only asset. And adding sewer and water bills, adding, that's a real cost to us. And those houses are less, they have older windows, they have single panes, they have, all the stuff that you'd like to do to be able to survive in your house. Those houses lack those things. So I hear, where is the problem? Is it townwide, is it local, looking at that? I think I think some of the easy things to do, like blocking floodways, I think that's something we should do. I think the idea of managed retreat, just as opportunities arise, let's get a fund together and we'll start buying some of these things. And also raising the roads, the flood risk areas, you can see where they are, all the blue areas. We may be able to eat that in pieces, because we've got now grants to do some culvert replacements. We have some of these coastal streams, not the big estuaries that you see, but we have coastal cold water streams. They're all groundwater fed, and they have salted trout in them. They have they're very unique habitats, and we have a big cluster of them. We're replacing the culverts under a different program to make them compliant with the culvert replacement, to keep them as fisheries waterways. Well, at the same time, so these now have all stone culverts and so forth. They'll be bigger and wider and raised, and we could raise a section of the road and eliminate the immediate flood. And one of the things that's important by tackling those kinds of things is there's an immediate risk that isn't the 100-year, 10-foot thing. The immediate risk is, by 2030, 2050, are these roads inundated twice a month at the moon tides? Then what went from, oh, look, there was road, there was water on, right across River Road, last month. Now it's like, oh, remember, if you have a doctor's appointment and it's high tide, you have to go a different route because you can't drive through, twice a month you can't drive through that road. That's not 200 years in the future. That's, in some spots, that's, maybe within 10 years. So, that's the kind of stuff that we can eat some of these things in pieces and just say, well, it isn't tens of millions of dollars to add 2 feet. The 2 feet could, in some places, will make a big difference. And then the dam safety issue is an interesting issue, since we don't own any of the dams. That is, the town doesn't own the dams. Fall River, under the 1880s, bill rights, they acquired essentially all the water resources in Westport. And they own these dams. A thing that we, and Fall River's not a rich community, but could you do, is there some way of, there's nothing we can do since we don't own them, but is there some way that they could do updated dam safety analysis, so at least you can look at what the risk is?
Yeah, and I think that's a good opportunity for that regional grant coordination with Fall River, with Dartmouth, with some of the adjacent towns which was some of the measures throughout here talking about, like hydraulic model assessments for critical routes.
At least you could do that, and the big dam, the one on Nokuchoke, so that the blue one up on Route 6, the state is redesigning Route 6 for bus, and that dam, at least the east end of that dam sits in Route 6. Route 6 used to do, when Lincoln Park was in Dartmouth, the road used to do a dog leg around. I mean, Route 6 really came and did a dog. You can see how the Dartmouth line sort of does a little dog leg V up there. Well, the road did that. And then the streetcars went away, and I think this was in the 30s or 40s. They put a big curve in, and when they put the big curve in, it buried the east end of the original dam. So now the highway is part of the dam, and in Adamsville Road is the dam. We look at the spillway and say, well, that's the dam, that's just the spillway. The road is the dam. And people, you just drive over the dam. And it was designed that way because the coffee shop in Gristmill on the other side, the head brace, the power for that gristmill runs right under the road, runs right through the road. And that's still operational. You can run, they don't do it any longer, but you can run the gristmill.
Mr. Hammond, you want to say something?
Just in terms of combining priorities, so, when you talk about cold water fisheries and culvert replacements, there is money for that, but it's okay to combine your priorities too. So if you have 5 cold water fisheries, but you also have a resiliency issue, and you have one of the things that you're not going to replace a culvert on a road that was paved 2 years ago. So all these factors sort of combine in together when you're thinking about replacing a culvert or an outlet. And that's one thing that, we hear from a certain organization that this is the top priority. Really making sure, as a state, we're trying to do that more and more, is really trying to say, okay, is this a priority for the DPW? We know it's a priority for Trout Unlimited, but is it a priority for the DPW? Is it a priority for a town? And that's, when we start looking at, when we're doing grant reviews, we actually do kind of look into all your, MVP stuff and everything else. It's a pretty in-depth process. So, when you can identify, this one here is a resiliency issue, and we also identified it on, our habitat assessment, and we identified it on, those starting to combine together do give you a lot more bang for your buck when you're going for funding.
And things like, I also did maintenance of stormwater facilities and things like that. There's um, you know, essentially we have, and there's a few places where we have some stormwater treatment facilities, we've built natural treatment systems, but by and large, most streets don't have any drainage in them at all. So there's a few places where there are catch basins, and most of those catch basins are Route 88, and we, under our federal program, we regularly maintain the catch basins that we are responsible for. But, you know, you have a 6-person highway department. There's no public works, there's no town engineer, there's no, there's no really ability to, luckily, because as the climate warms, we don't get much snow, so, so we've shrunk the department down. There's essentially no public works to maintain, we don't have any capability to, really to do, and neither is there's not a lot of infrastructure. The majority of roads don't have, and I'm talking about Main Road and Drift Road, I'm talking about all the big corridors people live on. We have roadside ditches, and the ditches run as long as the grade happens, and there's a little old stone culvert that dumps in someone's yard, and a little brook runs down across the back of my yard. That's the way it works,
Yeah, you know, it's,
But there's no easements, there's no
well, Las Vegas.
no one comes and looks at, I clean the culvert under my brook,
You know, one of the things that I'm hearing when I hear both of you speak is, so the north side with the temperature sensors and the AC survey, well, what you're really trying to find that vulnerable community. You know that your low income is gonna have less access to AC than your higher income, who tends to also be closer to the ocean.
Yep.
You know, so identifying these vulnerable areas and then saying, do we have a cooling station in a vulnerable area? You know, is that, do those people have a place to go? Or is our cooling station on the other side of the town where, it's gonna be inconvenient? Can they get there during a storm? Those are the types of things, what you may not need to distribute a community AC survey. Because you sort of know, in the areas where the lower income are, this is an area that probably doesn't have as much access to AC than the coastline. It also tends to be warmer in this area. So I think, just in the planning process, when you sort of go through these and try and combine them, think about, okay, well, what we're trying to do here is identify these areas of need, make sure they have the things that they need.
And the shading on the map tells you the story. See, you can see, these people don't need to worry about cooling. They get southwesterly breezes, they have, if you want to buy one of those dots down there, that's
Probably
a
has AC.
big number. But you look at this density up here, these lots are all tiny, at this scale, you don't see that, but that's dozens and dozens of lots. That's Route 6, that's the population. That's the risk.
And even in terms of your outreach, is there a prioritization to outreach to these communities? Once you identify these communities, can you allocate less resources by, trying to target, not target, but trying to, make sure that those regions have that information?
I mean, I think when I wrote this, I didn't have the knowledge, to presume that I really knew.
Absolutely
Who
not,
was,
yeah.
who was where the vulnerable community is,
Yeah.
because that's a pretty big swath of
Yeah.
area. I mean, they've identified an environmental justice area based on income here, which, and,
And which
we
may
know
or,
that.
and it may or not be correct.
Yeah,
That,
and-
the local,
And I just say, and part of one of the factors, if you were really able to do it, look at it, is age and what's their health
absolutely, yeah.
status. Because there could be low-income men who are 30 years old and, they'll just have to sweat it out,
Yeah.
as compared to somebody else, and people who are disabled, in some ways. So it's, and if you're only, giving out a handful a year, you wanted, and so it was, but there are probably people out in the community who, could say, yeah,
Yeah,
I'd pick,
if you went to the neighborhood and said,
Who
who in the
really
neighborhood needs one?
yeah, who really needs one, or who really
People
has a
don't know
problem,
it.
which is why I think, talking more to the, Beverly and the people on the Council of Aging, would be a good source, to do that, and so, but circling back, it is, if you really wanted to get into this and say, okay, Beverly, this should be a priority for your
Yeah.
organization right now.
We
Yeah,
have,
And that's the challenge.
And then sort of go through these things and think of, well, coastal flooding, who are you vulnerable, the most vulnerable, you have a large elderly community. Now, they may not be in the same location, but when you're thinking of coastal flooding, can people drive, are there people who are disabled? How do we outreach to those people, and make sure that they have, the evacuation that they need?
Right, yeah.
And
Well, I
this is
think the
super
coastal
complicated,
flooding
so don't feel
part,
bad, the fact that you're here, like, or on all these committees and volunteering is amazing. So like, from a state perspective, I hear all this stuff and then just sort of regurgitate it back, so it's not any,
Yeah, so,
we have a census block, right, a tract. We have a census tract that is less than 50% of the state median income.
You get block Maryland?
Yeah.
You do, you get CDBG?
Yeah, we don't get CDBG.
Have you applied?
Is
We
there,
have not, I've talked with our RPA about it before, but we didn't end up applying.
And we have, there's a big income distribution in town. We have very wealthy families and very expensive homes.
Okay.
And, we're, those of us serving in public capacities are concerned about that. I can tell you, if you went to town meeting and said, look, we're gonna fix this seasonal heat problem, we can give everybody an air conditioner, and it's gonna be, $280,000. The people who are in the north end who are getting the air conditioners would come to town meeting and vote against it.
I disagree.
And my taxes, $280,000. No, I'm gonna give you an air conditioner. They vote against drinking water, and they're drinking bottled water, and they vote against against extending water lines.
Because they don't want it developed, that's the big no.
Yeah.
Well, they don't want their developed, that's why they vote no, not because of the water.
The town, like with the sewer proposal, I think our tie it back to something I was talking about earlier, our communications with that process could have been better, and I think that's a place for improvement when we have these different projects being designed, and then they have to go to town meeting to get funding. I think we need to improve our communications in those processes.
So, I think we covered a lot of topics tonight, which was good. I definitely will collect everyone's sheets for consolidating, because I think what I'll do is go back and rework the draft chart right now and talk about consolidating, talk about prioritizing some of the goals so that we can look at it as a committee, just to see what would be best for some of the rephrasing for some of those pieces. And then I think we heard tonight too a lot about what some of the high priorities are. So I can make sure to mark those based on those conversations that we had tonight. And then we can go from there for talking about the medium and low priorities. We might want to think about too, reaching out to the public again, once we go back and revise the list, just to see what the perception of that is. Maybe focus on other parts of Westport too, where outreach could be better. And once we have a little bit better of a framework for those proposed mitigation measures, because we definitely want the outcomes of this to be productive and actionable for the town. And I think we will, because of the conversations we had a lot tonight about staffing, need to focus too about the implementation responsibility sections of this table too, and make sure that everyone in the town is on the same page regarding that, just to make sure that when the plan eventually does get adopted and then is going to be implemented in the next 5 years, that we've kind of worked through some of those road bumps. And luckily, we do have enough time to be able to do that, so I think that would be really productive to not rush the process and just make sure that everyone is on the same page for those things. So I think that would be good.
We've made notes.
Thank you.
We made notes.
Yeah, we know, I did.
Sorry, we have
And I'll
to
motivate me.
vacate our room, so
But thank you so much. I really appreciate the input and being able to come out tonight.